Sup boys? So today is finally the day that we're going to be going over Mona. So as you guys know, Mona has been a huge bucket list character for me to have when I first started playing the game. She's literally the entire reason that I re-rolled, because I wanted either her or Official. Ended up settling for Official, and just now have gotten Mona, so that's cool. There's already a ton of videos out there going over Mona and like different things that you can do. I'm gonna basically try to give you guys the most pertinent information for building her so that you guys can kind of decide what you want to do with your Mona and decide if she is even worth investing in general, because, you know, investing in characters is expensive. So with that being said, let's go ahead and break down a couple of different things that you can do with Mona to kind of maximize her potential. Essentially, you would either want to use her as your main damage dealer, where you're dealing all of the damage with her Hydro, with her auto attacks, or you just want to have her swap in really quick, use her elemental burst, apply some buffs and, you know, taunts maybe with her elemental skill, use her burst to pop and do big damage, and then kind of go back to doing your main DPS with someone else. Either scenario is perfectly fine for Mona. Both of those situations she can really excel in, and she's actually one of the top echelon of burst supports in my opinion. She's just really freaking good at it. I've also been using her as my like main DPS for a little while, and I have to say, I actually kind of like that too. So let's actually talk about using her as a burst support first, just because I feel like that's what most people are going to actually use her for, because she's just kind of known for being like a stupid number generator. As a sub DPS, the main goal here is to have Mona pop in, do either her taunt, you know, if you're just kind of, you know, rotating her elemental skill, or to, you know, pop her burst so that you can apply that omen buff and then, you know, hit for that stupid vaporize damage. Whatever kind of like situation you're going for here, usually you kind of switch into Mona and then switch pretty quickly right back out of her. So one of the best weapons that you could actually use is the Widsith. You get a random effect out of 3 possible effects, and all 3 of them are really freaking good. No matter which one you end up getting, they're all amazing, and especially in a situation for Mona, they do really well for her. Plus, it has crit damage as a substat, and it's a 4-star, which means it isn't insanely difficult to obtain. That's pretty awesome. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it is a 4-star weapon, so, you know, you might end up getting outpaced by some of the 5 stars, but for the purposes of just switching in really fast, swapping right back out, most of the 5 stars are also going to have their own separate drawbacks to them. Like Lost Prayers, it's pretty hard to get those stacks consistently on Mona if you're constantly having to switch her off field. And with Skyward Atlas, you do have this Favor of the Clouds thing that happens. That can actually pop the bubble for her burst too soon before you can actually apply Pyro again, and ends up messing up your combo. And Memory of Dust is kind of, you know, in a weird spot, because unless you build a team specifically about shields, you may not actually be benefiting a lot from that weapon either. So in the grand scheme of things, in my opinion, the Widsith is pretty much on the same level as a lot of the 5 stars. Until you get down to like raw stats and stuff like that. And then obviously, you know, you're getting more into like the main DPS side of things. So go with what you have. If you're more of like the gambling type, the Widsith is an amazing weapon. If you like to just see the high, super high numbers, it's a really good thing for that. If you want more consistent damage though, maybe a 5-star weapon would be more for your flavor. That just really depends on how you end up liking it. Since we already mentioned a lot of the 5 stars, I'm not going to go over too much here. Basically, the one that I do want to call out, Lost Prayers, only because it does have crit rate attached to it. That substat is super duper important, especially late game. You know, building crit is probably like the most beneficial stat that you can build, so having that on a weapon is super duper important. That's why I automatically like the Widsith so much anyways. It's just really good. That's not to say that Skyward Atlas and Memory of Dust are completely trash. I mean, attack percents are fine, but it's very situational, and depending on what kind of team comp you already have built around Mona, some of these are going to really excel versus the others, and that's just kind of the nature of the game, really. So also, we do need to mention Solar Pearl. Even though it is a Battle Pass weapon, you do actually have to pay real world money, so free-to-play players aren't going to be able to get this. Low spenders may already have it. It is actually really good. Crit rate percent again on that substat is amazing, and the fact that it can actually help buff, you know, your normal attacks and your elemental skill and elemental burst, that stuff's also really freaking good. Now for the more free-to-play options, Map of Mare is actually just straight up great. It's craftable, it's, you know, very easily obtainable, and it's probably going to be the best free-to-play accessible weapon that there is. Pavonia's Codex also works pretty well, and even as a budgeted player, if you just don't have a ton of options to go with, Drilling Tales of the Dragon is just amazing as well. Now, when it comes to your artifacts, depending on your team comp, if you don't already have a dedicated Noblesse, you should probably have a 4-piece Noblesse on Mona. If she is the only character that you have in that position, use her as your Noblesse user. If you already have something like Bennett or Beto or another character that you're using solely for their burst so that you can get this 4-piece set bonus, you don't have to use that on Mona. If that's the case and you already have someone using the 4-piece set, then you could also go with a 2-piece set, and there's a bunch of different options here. Remember that this 2-piece is going to increase our elemental burst damage, so we could actually go with a 2-piece of Heart of Depth for extra hydro damage, 2-piece Gladiator for extra attack percent, 2-piece Wondrous Truth for an extra 80 elemental mastery, and even in some of the earlier situations before you actually start farming out a ton of your 5-star artifacts, or if you just don't have suitable 5-star substats and stuff like that, you could actually end up going with like a 2-piece Scholar and a 2-piece Exile, and what that does is it just gives you a ton of energy recharge to help you get to that burst even faster. And these should probably only be used until you can get into the 5-star stuff, but essentially don't forget that you can just go back to these if you need to. Or another option is going with a full 4-piece of the Instructor if you have it, because getting all this elemental mastery it's stupid good. It's just good. Now, when it actually comes to the stats that you are looking for on your actual artifacts, typically with your sands, you would want to have attack percent. In almost every single situation, you would want to have attack percent. There are a couple of niche situations where maybe you would want to have elemental mastery. It's not terrible. If you are going for a straight vaporized comp, then elemental mastery works out fine. The only big difference with elemental mastery and attack percent is attack percent basically boosts like everything for you, whereas elemental mastery only boosts your reaction based damage. So in the event where, you know, you're throwing out your elemental skill and, you know, you're doing damage there, that damage might or might not get buffed because it depends on if the reaction is happening. The straight damage gets buffed with attack percent, but the elemental mastery wouldn't buff just the straight flat damage there. Energy recharge is also kind of iffy unless you just have abysmal energy recharge in your other substat pieces, then you could go with energy recharge here, but notice that, you know, energy recharge can get overkill, especially since Mona gets that with her ascension stat. You can overkill it and you could end up having too much energy recharge, which is kind of a waste, because you could still be getting to your burst even before you need to have a piece dedicated to that. Typically, you would want to have just decent energy recharge throughout your substats and your other pieces rather than dedicating the main stat here, because you'll get more benefit out of having attack percent or even elemental mastery if you are going that route. As far as your goblet, hydro percent, there's literally no reason to go with anything other than hydro damage here. And for your circlet, you would typically want to go with either crit rate percent or crit damage percent, depending on which direction you need to hit for that 1-to-2 ratio to work out best for you. If your weapon already has crit rate, maybe you want to go with crit damage here, or vice versa. However you see fit, just make sure that you try to at least hit that 1-to-2 ratio. That's typically like the general rule of thumb here. The one situation where the 1-to-2 ratio may not be more beneficial to you is if you already do have roughly 70% of crit rate somewhere, depending on your other substats. If without the circlet, you already have 70%, then you would definitely want to dump the rest of it into crit damage, simply because at the 70 to 75% of crit rate, you can pretty much use food and just almost get to 100%. So it's a lot easier to just dump everything else into crit damage, but that's kind of a niche situation as well. So take that for what you will. And then as far as like actual substats that you would want to shoot for, just the basic run-of-the-mill stuff here. I mean, crit rate, crit damage, of course, are always going to be great. Energy recharge, like we said, is a pretty decent one to have. It's not like super duper important. It is pretty nice to have some extra energy recharge in your substats just to help you get to your burst faster. Just try not to overdo it if you can. And then any kind of attack percents to boost regular damage across the board, and any kind of elemental mastery to help that reaction damage that you're inevitably going to get whenever you use your burst for that popping mechanic. Now for these talents, I hate the way that this is freaking For your talents, basically you would always want to prioritize your burst first and foremost. Then as a sub DPS, you would really want to go with your elemental skill, and then because you're hardly ever going to be using her normal attack as a sub DPS, just kind of worry about that last. Don't forget about it completely, because there are times when you're going to need it, but you can kind of worry about it last. Okay, now let's talk about DPS Mona. So there is going to be a lot of crossover with what we just talked about, which does actually mean that we can make this go by pretty quickly. So basically the Widsith is still really amazing here. The only issue that the Widsith has whenever you get into like main DPS territory is that the cooldown time on the actual effect of the Widsith, no matter which one you end up getting, basically it lasts for 10 seconds and then it can't occur for another 30 seconds after you get the effect. So there's a 20-second lull period of just raw damage, right? And that raw damage with the Widsith is usually a lot lower for that 20 seconds outside of having 5 stars, because the 5 stars have just a general higher threshold for how much they can allow you to do with the base stats. In that scenario, typically 5 stars are better for main DPS Mona, but the Widsith, depending on how high you have it refined, can outweigh it depending on the situation. That 10 seconds that you have a high refined Widsith going at full capacity may end up being just slightly better than some 5 stars, or it could be just slightly behind it, making it extremely comparable to the 5 stars. Just kind of understand that if you do have 5 stars, you typically would want to go with those first. So in general, Skyward Atlas is probably going to be your best bet here. I personally still like the Lost Prayers. I just like having crit percent on my weapon. It's just really good. That's also why I do really like Solar Pearl. I will mention that Memory of Dust is also a possible weapon here, but just kind of remember that it's a little bit niche, and it is one of those things where you have to have the team built around shields to really get the maximum benefit out of it. So just kind of keep that in mind. But then we actually do want to talk about Black Cliff Agate. Now, having crit percent here is also really good, being said it is a 4-star weapon. It's in the shop, so it is free to play friendly to an extent, just depending on how many summons that you've done in general. I'm not sure if it's currently in the shop. It might be when you watch this video, it might not be. Mapamare, also really solid here. Being said it does have Elemental Mastery, is kind of, in my opinion, not as good as the sub DPS situation. I would much rather have something that had attack percent on it. Typically, Mapamare still does really, really well here, and I do think that it would still outperform Eye Perception and even Frostbearer. I personally don't like Frostbearer at all, but a lot of people seem to at least say it's an option if you have it. Just know that the Eye Perception is kind of one of those weird situations where it can have some potential, but it does have a lot of drawbacks. Like the passive is physical damage, and that kind of messes you up with your hydro damage cup and stuff like that. So it kind of works out really awkwardly, and it's got like a low ceiling for how much base attack it's going to give you. So if you have Widsith, definitely go with that over Eye Perception. Now, as far as your artifacts go for the main DPS role, this is a little bit different. So typically what you would want to do here, since you are going to be using your normal attacks way more often than you would in like a sub DPS role, Heart of Depth is going to automatically be up there really, really high. This works out really good because using your elemental skill increases charged attack damage, and because typically catalysts in general, catalyst users have just a really high multiplier on their charged damage, and that's just really freaking good. So anything that you see that increases charge attack damage could actually be really, really good for you. But Heart of Depth makes a ton of sense here because it also boosts your hydro damage, so kind of a no-brainer. Until you get a decent 4-piece of this though, you could go with a 2-piece of this and a 2-piece of Gladiator's Finale, or don't scoff at, using Noblesse, because it's still really good getting that elemental burst damage here as well. Another 2-piece to consider would be the Wondrous Truth. If you do want to go with more of an elemental mastery focused build, you could go with this. You could actually go with a full 4-piece of this as well. Increases charge attack damage by 35%. Because you are a catalyst user, that's also really freaking good. And don't forget that you can kind of mix and match Wondrous Troop with a bunch of different things as well. Elemental Mastery is good on most catalyst users anyways, so Wondrous Troop and Gladiator's Finale, for instance, they work really well. Wondrous Troop and Noblesse works really well. I mean, just kind of whatever you want to mix and match. And as far as like before you actually get like a solid set of any of those, the 5-star situation, you could just go with a 2-piece of the Exile. And oddly enough, not a lot of people talk about it, but the Berserker actually would be really nice. 2-piece of Exile, 2-piece of Berserker, extra crit rate here, extra energy recharge there. I mean, it's good. Now, with that being said, what kind of stats are you looking for here? Like we talked about with the sub DPS, attack percent makes the most sense on your Sands. Elemental Mastery isn't going to help you out a ton unless you just decide that you're going to be fighting a bunch of slimes or something. Elemental focused enemies that are always going to be taking reactionary damage whenever you attack them. But even then, Elemental Mastery is going to significantly fall off compared to attack percent. So attack percent is 9 times out of 10 going to be the best option for you to go with here. Your Goblet, like I said, always going to be Hydro percent, doesn't matter, and crit rate, crit damage, of course, keeping that 1-to-2 ratio in mind, but still that caveat with the 70 to 75% like we talked about earlier. And then as far as substats go, again, pretty simple. Crit rate, crit damage, of course, as always, especially as a main TPS, is even more important. Attack percents, any kind of attack percents that you can find. Any kind of energy recharge would actually be really great as a substat here. And if you can sprinkle in some Elemental Mastery, you could look for that, but I wouldn't specifically go for pieces that have Elemental Mastery on them. Just if you happen to get it, it's not horrible. Lastly, for your talents, you typically still would want to go with your burst as your first and foremost. I personally would say, because I'm using my normal attack so often, I may prioritize that one like 51% of the time over my burst, but really your burst is still super important here because of how much extra damage you get under this Omen duration. It's just really, really solid to have this buffed up. And then your elemental skill can be your last priority, but again, don't forget about it because it's still pretty good. So I would definitely go burst and normal attack depending on how you feel. One of those two should be first. Obviously let the second one be second, and then let your elemental skill be last. But yeah, boys, that's pretty much going to be it for Mona. She is one of the funner characters to mess around with. I've been using her as like a main DPS mainly, but as a burst support, I still like her. And that's probably what I feel like most people are going to use her with, but she's like the original waifu for me, so I kind of gotta use her as a main DPS for me. I like having her on the field more often because, I mean, seeing these attack animations, dude, that's what I live for. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. But anyways, boys, that's gonna be it. Hopefully you guys got something useful out of this video. I'm gonna go start working on some Eula stuff because now that I have her, I gotta get to work on making something for her. So anyways, see ya.